Try that.
There he is.
Hey, very nice.
All right. Well, I have to say it is an absolute honor speaking to you during the world ending with the person that predicted the manner in which things would start crumbling down in the 60s. So this is a high honor for us. Thank you for sitting down with us.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure, really. I've been doing a lot of these, and I keep thinking, you know, I better get on with my life and do some other things. And I think, nope, this is what I'm supposed to do right now. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you.
What is it like before we even jump in? Obviously, a lot of people have seen videos of yours from 50, 60 years ago, because of just how spot on they turned out to be. What is it like feeling like you're telling people that the world's coming to an end, or not coming to an end, but that it's moving in the wrong direction, that you have people that have infiltrated the country? What is it like knowing that for such a long amount of time? And how do you keep your how did you manage to keep your sanity for so long?
Well, there's an assumption in there that I did manage. Actually, I think I did. It's a good question. I haven't thought about that aspect of it. I suppose it's kind of like anything else that is traumatic when you do something that has a lot of risk involved, and then you get used to it. Just get used to it. Because I remember back in 1960, when I was just learning the first rudimentary basics about what was going on in the world, it was very alarming to me. And I went through a period that a lot of people go through, probably almost everybody goes through, a period of alarm, and then fear, and then distress, and depression. And that lasted probably a couple of years. And then after that, you just get used to it. And that's just the way life really is. And you don't think about it anymore.
So acceptance, you made it to acceptance. And
yeah, this is what it is. So get on with it and do something about it. Now, some people, of course, run the other way. They try and escape the reality because it's unpleasant and has a lot of risk in it. But for some reason, that was not my instinctive choice. I just felt that the greater the risk, the greater the problem was. It required greater effort on my part. So that was the path I chose. It wasn't probably not an intellectual choice. It was just something that happened. I'm sure my upbringing had a lot to do with it. I came from a broken family, but I was taken in at an early age by my Aunt Alice, who was a school teacher. And all of a sudden, I went from a very bad environment to an excellent environment, one with ethics, one with intellect, one with finesse, one with concern for other human beings. And it was just like night and day. But fortunately, I guess I made the transfer early enough that the biggest imprint of my life was that latter stage and not the earlier stage. And the reason I mention that is because my Aunt Alice was a great influence on me in many ways. And in this area that you've raised, I remember her saying at a very young age, I remember this, I didn't know what it meant till later, but she used to say, well, I have the courage to fight, but I am too much of a coward to surrender. Now, as a kid, that was very hard to figure out. But as I became older and I realized that it would be suicidal to just surrender and not do anything, not fight back. You had to fight because it was life or death. It was liberty or slavery. Oh, there's no choice. So anyway, that's my long answer to your question. I'm not quite sure. Probably was the influence of my aunt, and maybe something just deep inside me. I just felt this was my life. This is what I had to do.
Well, you have a couple videos. I'm imagine you know this by now, but a couple videos that have gone viral. one being the Yuri Bezmonov interview. Hold on. There we go. Yeah, everybody entering, please mute yourself. So you have obviously the Yuri Bezmonov video that went viral, the one on just kind of communism in general. What was it like at the time when those videos came out? Because it seemed like they really caught on here recently, just because people had the benefit of seeing how things played out and comparing it. You know, what was the reception at the time that you posted, you know, that you made those videos?
Well, there was very little reception, really, and I never got any negative pushback like I would expect today, or very little of it. But it didn't catch fire. Nobody seemed to be interested. It was like, oh, that's so far out. Nobody could believe it.
Yeah.
And besides, life was very good, and not only did they not want to see any of this sort of thing, but it was not easy to see it because life was great. I mean, we had liberty, we had freedom to move. Everybody was patriotic. You know, we loved America. There was nobody bad-mouthing the country, trying to tear it down. Our founding fathers were still revered. You know, it was all of those good things. So there was a lot of disinterest, I suppose. It was very disappointing to me. Whereas today, of course, there's a lot more motivation to pay attention because we don't have this appearance of solid support that we did back then. And so it's like night and day in terms of the reception. And I think it's only because of the awareness of the general population as to the seriousness and the imminence of all of these things.
So you kind of brought a lot of people into that mindset of understanding what's going on. How did you begin? Like, how did you even start to learn about, you know, communism and really how it started to subvert the United States? How did that all begin?
Well, it began very incrementally. It was not something that that landed upon me with a big explosion or anything. I was in the corporate world. I was working for a large insurance company and group insurance field, underwriting and installing group insurance plans for companies. And I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was very much involved with myself and my family, trying to look good, trying to make some money, trying to climb the ladder, you know, enjoy myself. Very materialistic, I suppose, because that's the way I was absorbing it from the culture. I really hadn't thought much about the world or my responsibility to do anything except just take care of myself and my family. And then I came across a pamphlet. I don't remember to this day how I came across it, but it was a little blue pamphlet. And it was very critical of the United Nations, written by a college professor from some Midwestern college I'd never heard of, and some professor I'd never heard of. But there was this absurd booklet saying that the United Nations was not what it appeared to be. In fact, it was very critical of it. And of course, that was outrageous because I had been through school, right? And I had been taught that the UN was our last best hope for peace. It was wonderful, all these good things. It's going to put an end to war and poverty and discrimination. And it's going to bring on an era of economic advance and brotherhood and then all these good things. And to think that somebody would be saying the opposite, that it was a trap and that it was pretending to be these things, but really wasn't, it just was so absurd to me. But I read the pamphlet mainly because I thought whoever wrote this thing, whether the professor or not, he's so full of it. No way. But it got to me because a couple of little things I suppose did make sense, but it didn't impress me. But I'm going to try and shorten this. I decided that one day I had some spare time on my lunch and my corporate office was in downtown Los Angeles. So I decided to go about 4 or 5 blocks away where the main library was. And I hadn't been in a library in a long time, but I went in there to get some books on international affairs, about the United Nations, and check out some of the facts or what I thought were lies in the pamphlet. Anyway, to make this story a little shorter, I read a couple of books and I detected 2 things. First of all, I could sense that most of the books on this topic were written by UN people or people who were employed or had some kind of a contract with them. They were all benefiting in some way from being part of the UN sphere of influence. So I was aware of that, but I could tell that it was a con operation. This was deception going on. I don't want to go into this too deeply, but before my Aunt Alice took me in, my previous part of my life, I came from a very broken family, and my father was what you'd call the quintessent con artist. And I lived among con artists at a very young age, and I can spot a con pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And I could detect that in these books about the UN, and I checked some of the facts out, and I said, by golly, this guy that wrote the pamphlet it looks like he's right. So then I discovered I had a Crusader gene. I never knew I had one. I never thought I would take on a feeling of responsibility for the world or for the political future of our country or our future generations and all the things that we used to read about how wonderful it was. It wasn't part of my agenda, but all of a sudden it was my agenda. I began to think, my gosh, by this time I already had a couple of little kids. I'm thinking, these little guys are going to grow up in a world that's not so good if this continues. And besides, I was mad because I'd been lied to. So my Crusader gene started to vibrate. And make a long story short, I quit my job with the insurance company. My wife almost had a fit. She said, where are we going to get food on the table and everything? I said, no, don't worry about that. We got to fix the world, right? First, before we worry about little things like food and where you're going to live, things like that. And so I jumped into the fray. And from that point forward, I had so much to learn. But every day, and even to this day, there's hardly a day that goes by. But what I don't realize is the tableau of the whole thing there is so large. There's so many things that need to be fixed that I didn't know about. And so it's just one step at a time. I went from the United Nations to realize that there were a lot of other things wrong in the world. I wrote a book on the Supreme Court, their decisions. And I got into the health field and discovered that our healthcare industry was corrupt. You talk about corruption in politics. I thought, oh my gosh, our venerable healthcare system, which I always thought was great, because after all, they're saving lives, right? The idea that institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and educational systems would put profit ahead of actually health was inconceivable to me. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that what got me from there to here is a whole long series of little tiny steps, each one leading me to an area that I hadn't ever dreamed I would be headed toward in the beginning. So it was not a plan. It was just where I was propelled to go. And it's been one heck of a journey. And as you said correctly at the beginning, that it's just a scary one. And it's not a pleasant world to live in, except if you have this Crusader gene. Then you think, well, yeah, at least I'm doing some good. Maybe future generations will benefit from what I'm doing today.
Well, there's certainly a lot of people that have, and to have, someone that can kind of, to not have to think and discover it on your own, but someone that can give us a head start. You might not realize just how much of a role you played in a lot of younger people that are seeking truth and trying to just, gain coordinates and figure out why does this irrational thing happen? Why is the world the way it is? And, some of your work really has helped in centering and putting pieces together and, having things make sense. So yeah, that's for whatever that's worth. That I'm sure that means a lot to a lot of people.
Well, thank you for that, because it's worth a lot to me. That's my feedback. That's why I do this. I love seeing that expression on someone's face when you can tell they just had an aha moment, oh, I get it now, sort of thing. Because I went through all of those things myself, and each of my aha moments, or most of them at least, I had to find on my own. I had to dig it out and put the pieces together. And then I think, I could explain this, and somebody could understand it without taking 2 years or 3 years like I did. They could figure it out in 10 minutes. Wouldn't that be great? So
Yeah.
that's what I've been trying to do.
Now, so the I really love the Yuri Bezmonov video.
Mm-hmm.
How did you even find out about him? How did that take place? What was that experience like?
Well, I ran across Yuri Bezmonov in a government report. I think it was published by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. He had been interviewed. I don't know where he was located at the time, but anyway, they had a transcript of his story, his statement, as he was delivering it before an investigating committee. And it was extremely interesting to me. And I, of course, didn't know anything about it prior to that. So I did take notice from this report that he was living in, I think it was Virginia at the time. So it happened not long after that. I had a little bootstrap type of film production operation going. I was producing very low budget documentary films. So I had a crew in Virginia. We were doing some recording. Oh, I've forgotten. No, I'm sorry. I got my story mixed up here. I started down the wrong track. I'm thinking of my interview with Norman Dodd. That was in Virginia. No, we got Yuri Bezmonov here in Los Angeles. And I don't remember how that came about, but I did make contact with him. And he was in Los Angeles for another reason. And of course, I was working in Los Angeles at the time. So we made a rendezvous, and I took my camera crew, and we went to a house, and it was a very nice house in Westwood, I think it was. Some lady volunteered her very nice living room for our camera crew. Yuri sat there, and I sat there, and we just made the recording, and that's how it all came about. Very simple.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite an incredible video. I mean, that has blown up. I know I shared it on my page, and it had about like 100,000 just from that specific download. But I've seen cases where it's millions of people that have seen it. I think it was even in a recent video game.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Call of Duty, I think was it. A big game. And yeah, it's gone around the world. I don't know how many millions, maybe 100 million people have seen little pieces of it anyway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an important video. I guess, I mean, it's such an important story to know. How and when did really the KGB start infiltrating the United States?
Well, that is a very good question. I'm sure that's in the record. I mean, I remember reading so many documents and books and personal stories of people who were in the movement back in the beginning of the communist movement here in America. And several of those top people in the Communist Party became defectors, and they wrote books about it. And right now, it's kind of a blur in my mind as what dates and who, what, where, and how. But in general, and that's really the important thing here, communism had its roots in the United States before it took root in Russia. The earliest rumblings of communism were not in Russia. They were in Europe and in London and in New York. And Trotsky, of course, came from New York, and he was funded, and he went back and imported, literally, you might say, the communists in London and New York went into Russia and stole the revolution, the Bolshevik revolution. They stole it. And they did it very brilliant. They had just a few, I'm going to guess probably 20 or 30 sailors that they paid. And the sailors came in with rifles, and they took over the assembly, and they had everybody leave, and they put their people and sat down. They stole the government. And it was just a very simple operation. 30 or 40 people stole the whole government, and they took it over. And that became the Great Russian Revolution. And so it was kind of interesting because I had a whole different picture of the Soviet revolution. I thought the masses had risen up. No, not at all. There were some, but it was a coup, basically a coup d'etat. And the socialists who took it over, the Mensheviks, I think they called themselves, they were socialists and they were revolutionaries, but they weren't like Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was a whole different character. He was not a Marxist. I have to digress here for a moment. This is important for people to know, and that is that there's a difference between a Marxist and a Marxist-Leninist. And those words are thrown around a lot by the comrades, and most people outside of the club have no idea that there's a difference. And that there is a difference, and a huge difference. A Marxist, in their lexicon, a Marxist is a person who's read the works of Karl Marx, of course, you know, Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto, and they like the ideology, you know, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and they buy into the slogans, which are very easy to do because the slogans are good, and they don't question that there's something behind it. So they believe that, you know, the society needs to be redistributed so that everybody is equal, and they believe that those that have too much, the capitalist exploiters, that all we got to do is just get rid of them and everything will run just fine. Everybody will be happy and all that. But that's Marxism. But no country in the world has ever been taken over by Marxists, believe it or not. The only places where you see countries being taken over through revolution, they're done by Marxist-Leninists. And the difference there is that these are Marxists who have also read the works of Lenin, and they put the two together. Now, Lenin was a whole different animal. He didn't care too much about all the social theory. His whole thesis was, comrades, how do we come to power? How do we seize control of the state? What lies do we have to tell? Do we have to pretend to be capitalists in order to do that? And he said, yes, we do. And he said, well, we can pretend to do anything. We must practice deception. That was the whole essence of Lenin, is what kind of deception and organizational tactics can we use to come to power? Then we can worry about Marxism later on. But the first thing is to overthrow the existing system. So it's the revolutionaries were always Marxist-Leninists. Those are the ones we see on the street today. Those are not Marxists. Those are Marxist-Leninists. Or not even that. They could be just paid mercenaries. They're being paid by Marxist-Leninists to go break windows and scare everybody to death. I have a feeling that many of those people out there in the streets really don't have any ideology at all. They're just paid, and that's what they do. And maybe they go along a little bit, but they're not theoreticians. They're not going to debate with you on anything. All they want to know is, well, give me a hammer, give me a gun, give me a brick, and give me a fire band. And what do you want me to do? You know, and they go destroy something. So anyway, I've lost my track. I wandered away. How did Yuri come into this? Is that, yes, Yuri was talking about that aspect of communism. And it was a very important lesson to learn. And as you asked me before, did people really care about that? They said no. My answer was no, because we hadn't seen too much of this fire and destruction and hatred and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's how it all started. And Yuri was the guy to tell the story. He came from the middle of it. He risked his life, as you know, to get to the United States. And he was brokenhearted because the FBI didn't want him. He was an embarrassment to them, because that he wanted them just to go back to Canada, which he did. He thought they would embrace him. I mean, here's a defector with all this knowledge, names, dates, places, and they wanted nothing to do with him. He told me, they wanted him just to go away, and I couldn't understand that. I thought, you mean the FBI and the whole government is infiltrated by Soviet agents, even in our intelligence community? And I've learned since then that is not the case. I mean, there might be some cases like that, but they're loaded with people who take orders from above, and the people at the top, at that time in particular, did not want to have any conflict with Russia. They wanted everything to be, you know, cooperation and friendliness, and they didn't want to have a KGB defector embarrassing them and causing them to have to admit that, yeah, maybe the comrades in Moscow weren't the best partners to have after all. So they just wanted that to go away because it got in the way of their diplomatic program at the particular day that this was happening.
So did you have to, I mean, that interview, you know, on the record, out front in the open, did you have to persuade him to partake in that? Was he anxious about risk, or was he eager to get his information out by the by whatever mechanism was available to him?
Yuri was totally eager. He risked his life to get out of the system. And once he got out, he wanted to make sure that the rest of the world wouldn't have to face what he did. Now remember, he came from a privileged sector of society. His father was a general in the Red Army, and they were privileged. They had everything. They lived in a big house. They had transportation, never had to worry about the best food, best clothing, best education. He was on the blue rail. And in spite of that, he still, he couldn't stand it because of what he saw and he participated in. And yeah, he risked all of that. He gave all of that up. And when he came to America, he wanted to shout to all Americans, wake up, wake up. Don't let this happen here. We have no place to go after here. He was already thinking, well, if this happens here, where am I going to go? I'm a dead duck. And he was right.
Yeah. It's interesting to see, because a lot of what he talked about, with with misinformation and disinformation, you can see examples of that today, about how news would, they'd get news to amplify things that they wanted amplified. Just in like, you can see Chinese run publications doing the exact same thing that Yuri talked about, like Forbes, for example. Steve Forbes sold that in, I think, 2012, and now it's owned by a CCP company. And they are acting exactly, as Yuri said, that the KGB operated. And I just kind of found it fascinating, because, yeah, people do think more KGB being spy related stuff, but they don't think of it as just this massive lie, this massive disinformation campaign that exists, all throughout the world.
Yeah, the main role of the intelligence agencies today is not spying or getting military secrets, although that's part of it. The whole game is to gain control of the minds of the people they want to subjugate, because it's a lot easier to enslave a person if you convince them it's for their own good than if you have to do it at the point of the bayonet. So that's what the whole effort has been for ever since I was born. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but now that I look back on it, all of the propaganda measures that were going on around the world were an effort to condition people to think that this growth of government, which you call it communism, fascism, Nazism, whatever you want to call it, this continual growth of government in the name of protecting and helping the people, it only has one place to go. And that's when it grows to completion. It's now not 50% or 80%, it's 100% control. So once that process starts, you cannot stop it. It's going to totalitarianism. But if you can convince the people that it's all good, because it's for their own good, to protect them against terrorism, or protect them against pornography, or to protect them against a virus, or to protect them against an enemy from another country, or whatever, you get people scared. And if you take away their food supply and maybe their electricity, maybe that'll be the next ploy. And then how are you going to survive? So it's always, well, the bigger and bigger and bigger government is necessary to protect you and make sure that you can survive all of these horrible things that are happening. So once you understand what the game is to continually instigate. If they can't, if it doesn't already exist, if some crisis already exists, some problem already exists, like let's say pollution, well, fine, you play with it. Say pollution is going to take over the world. We got to do something about it. And if it's not bad enough, then make it worse. Actually do things to make pollution worse in the name of fighting pollution, so that the people really will have a problem. If terrorism is a little issue, make it a big issue, If an infectious disease is a little issue, make it a huge issue, so that the level of fear and panic will be so great that people will accept any insult to their liberty in exchange for protection. That's the game, folks. That's it. And once you understand that basic rule book, then everything fits into place.
It's a really good lesson.
Yeah, that's a mic drop moment there, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let that one sit. So the another interview that you did, or it wasn't necessarily an interview, but you introduced Manning Johnson, and I found him really fascinating. How did you find out about Manning Johnson, and what can you tell us about him?
Well, I never met Manning Johnson, but I found his book. and that was in preparation for that film, More Deadly Than War. And yeah, Manning Johnson was a black guy, and he was a high-ranking member of the Communist Party in the United States, trying to do the very things we're talking about. And at some point, he was high-ranking. He was on the National Negro Commission, I think they called it, within the Communist Party. He's one of the top leaders. And he finally, like so many others, at some point, they said, wait a minute. These people aren't the least bit interested in racial equality or in better pay or better living conditions, or they're not interested in us at all. They want to use us like cannon fodder. And that's what I think Manning Johnson used that phrase. They wanted it, or Leonard Patterson, another fellow, he's the guy that used the word or the phrase cannon fodder over and over again. And he was another high-ranking black fellow in the Communist Party. So I ran across these people primarily in the literature first. Of course, Leonard Patterson, I did finally get to meet, and we put him on the road. He gave some great speeches for us before he passed away. So anyway, I did never meet Manning Johnson, but I read his book. I think his book was called Color, Communism, and Common Sense, or something like that. A very, very powerful statement about his journey, his awareness of the fact that he and his people were being used by the Marxist-Leninists as cannon fodder for a revolution that was going to end up with everybody of all colors in slavery.
Do you happen to remember the time frame of his? He had a speech that was, one speech that was turned into a video, but it was cut off, and there's not like a known time frame of when that speech took place. Do you have any recollection of kind of when he left the Communist Party and when that speech was given, or is it kind of iffy?
I don't have any recollection of it, but that should be pretty easy to find out. I think that detail probably is on the back cover of the pamphlet or the booklet that I'm talking about, or it's mentioned right in the body of it. It should be easy to find out. You could get close enough to within probably 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Right. So the obviously you got into the understanding of the UN. How is kind of global communism the goal of most of these world groups, or what we would call global, maybe global socialism? I mean, is it all essentially the same? Is it just complete totalitarian control without borders?
Yeah, are these all just various fronts all working towards an aligned or comparable goal?
That's a great question, because it's another area where I think we need a lot more clarity on what's happening. As I see it, these are all variants. They're different variants of the same thing underneath, but they don't necessarily realize that themselves. For example, first of all, let me say what the thing is that they're variants of, and that would be collectivism. If you peel off the label of communism, fascism, and Nazism, and all these isms that we fight against and we say they're horrible, and you compare them, they're the same. That was something that surprised me when I got into this back in the 60s. As I took that step, I started to read everything I could find by all the world collectivists. You've got to read Lenin, you've got to read Stalin, you've got to read Mao, you've got to read Marx and all of these guys, and then you can find the same almost word for word sentiments being expressed in college textbooks in American universities. It's not written by Lenin or Stalin, but it's the same thing. Once you understand what the ideology is, you find it everywhere. And in many cases, the people who are speaking these lines and expressing these sentiments have no idea that they're paraphrasing Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin. And they would be horribly insulted if you were to tell them so. They would probably want to beat you up or something, because they have this cherished belief of it. And this thing that they all believe in is called collectivism. And those are the principles. And as much as possible, I try and use that word when we're discussing this ideology. But the truth is that there are separate groups within that ideology, and sometimes they fight like the devil against each other. as the communists and the Nazis fought in World War II. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost their lives? The Russians fighting the Germans. And they're communism versus Nazism. The ideology is identical. So why were they fighting? Well, not over ideology. They were fighting as to who was going to be the winner, who's going to dominate, who's going to control the territory. It was Hitler versus Stalin. That's what it really was. And that's pretty much the way it always is in these subgroups. They fight against each other for dominance, and yet they'll join together and fight side by side against their common enemy, which is people like you and me. Well, who are we? Well, we're the proper name for us, if we have thought it through at least. We're individualists. And if you take all, I identified about 7 different principles of collectivism, having analyzed all these writers from different flavors of collectivism and identified the 7 main pillars of it. And then I constructed the opposite in each of those, and those become the 7 main pillars of individualism. They're just the opposite on every point. And I think it's an important study for everybody to make, so they understand what it is they believe. They got to choose sides. When you get to these issues, you can't get in the middle. That's one of the interesting things about it. You cannot get in the middle. It's one or the other, and you have to choose. And I found that most people, even those who formerly had been collectivists, when they understand the opposite of what it is they believed in, they switch over and say, well, yeah, I guess I was wrong. You know, a lot of the collectivists in the world, even though they're out to get us, so to speak, they want to rule our lives for our own good, of course. Deep down underneath, they're good people. It's hard to believe that when people are trying to kill you, you know, but they're trying to kill you for your own good. You understand? and it's hard to explain what I'm saying, but actually some of these people, once they understand the principles involved, are terribly embarrassed by the extreme position that they had. It was only because they were fooled into thinking they really were fighting for humanity. They were fighting for justice. They were fighting, you know, to put an end to oppression and things like that. But once they realized that that was not the case, then everything changes. Okay, I meander off the topic again.
No, that was good. So that leads to another question. So you mentioned that there's sort of a rhyme to like academia and textbooks and things like that, right? Like it might not necessarily be Das Kapital or Mein Kampf, but there's sort of a rhyme that carries on throughout these various things. So why is it that you believe, or why would you posit that those ideas or those things are so appealing, especially to folks in academia? Is it sort of a very effective con that plays upon the better angels of our nature to sort of slip in the poison pill, or why is it you think that seems to be so popular and such a perennial issue that each new generation? Is it just indoctrination? Is it you know, naivety and being conned? What would you suggest on that front?
I think everything you said is a part of the formula. I think it plays a role in varying degrees depending on the individual that's subject to it. You have to remember that prior to that pamphlet I mentioned in the beginning, I would have to consider that I was a collectivist. I mean, I fell for all this stuff. I was not an activist. I didn't really want to get out there and change the world. Didn't want to kill anybody in order to bring it about. But if anybody had asked me if I thought progressive income tax was fair, I'd probably say, yeah, of course. I mean, those who have more should pay more, you know? It sounds like a good idea, from each according to our ability, to each according to their need. What's wrong with that, you know? Put an end to racism and war. What's wrong with that? You know, so it's a con game because they never present the whole story. They only present it's like the frosting on the cake, but instead of cake underneath the frosting, it's dog dung, but it looks like chocolate cake. And so you never get to, by the time you slice the cake, it's too late. You're already, you know, you're living under the system. So that's kind of it. And people don't really look deep enough to find out what are the consequences of these things. And they're not being taught that either. Now, I think that once you explain things to them, most people of goodwill will see through. Let me give you an example. from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's a wonderful sentiment. It's the basis of Christian charity, is it not? And it is. So what's wrong with it? Well, the thing that's wrong with it is that there's one concept missing. It's only half of the idea. The part that's missing is how.
Right. Choice
How?
versus coercion, right?
Yes, yes. These are great objectives. But now if we have to force everybody and kill them even if necessary, if they don't do it, is it still a good idea? And the answer is no. It's worse than not doing anything, you see.
Right.
If you want to be charitable and help a person and it's your choice and you do it voluntarily, wonderful. Now we've got individualism. But if you say, no, it's a good idea and you will do this or you will be punished, now it's collectivism, you say. So the reason people fall for it is because they're not given the whole formula. They're just given the first part, the objective, without analyzing the road to achieving it and the methods required to achieve it and the consequences of that method of achievement using coercion. Once they get the rest of the picture, it's easier to say, oh, I get it now, you see.
Yeah. So that they've been serenaded by the siren song of sort of hollow platitudes, and never bothered to do the homework of what's the next step and the next step after that.
Yeah,
right?
and they're not encouraged to think about it either. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sure not. So this, I think this maybe answers a question I had in preparation for this, but I'll throw it out anyway, just in case you have other insight. So I was watching other interviews with you, sort of in anticipation of this. And in one, you mentioned, I believe you had a run-in with the People's Bookstore in LA, and you were getting acquainted with the literature, and they noticed your eager consumption, and they sort of fast-tracked you for membership in the party. And you had a wonderful line in that other interview where basically you showed up to a couple of these recruitment meetings and you threw out some stuff, and it rapidly became apparent to you that they hadn't read their own literature,
Right.
but you had. And I was really curious how you managed, and I think you alluded to this with being able to spot a con early on, but how is it you were able to elude that siren song and rise to the point where you could not only escape it, but then break it down and package it to others to help them escape it as well?
Wow, I don't know if I can answer that question. Why was I able to see through it, and or at least to do so faster than other people? I don't know. Maybe.
Is it just that the literature, once you get past the slogans, sort of decays rapidly? Because I've encountered many folks who, I'm sure they could chapter and verse the Communist Manifesto, but they haven't quite figured out that maybe enforcing your good nature at the tip of a gun is not an ideal moral high ground.
Yeah, they get confused about the Good Samaritan, They think if the Good Samaritan had pulled his sword out and said, hey, buddy, give me half of your purse because this guy needs it. And if you don't, I'm going to cut off your hand. Now, he's not the Good Samaritan anymore,
Right.
Or is he? See, that's the question. So some people would say, yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, back to your question, I have a feeling it was a combination of a couple of things. I had been sensitized to the con very early. That might have been it. And also I had already had one crack in the egg. The first crack in the egg is always the hardest. Once that first crack appears in the shell, everything else goes easily. And I had already seen the fact that I had been misled. I considered I'd been deceived on this issue of the United Nations. So now my defenses were down. I'm thinking, what else do I not know? Or what else have I been fooled on? That might have played a part in it too, because now I had kind of a humility about who I was. I recognized that I didn't know everything, So now I was really truly seeking information and not just trying to find something that reinforced my existing opinion.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, so jumping to today, I think it's fair to say that it doesn't look like good times are ahead. I think some of Yuri's fears might be coming true as far as, if America falls, where do we go? One is it true? I mean, or do you think it's true? Do you think that this is essentially it for the United States? Is this a point of no return? And you know, are we heading a future of, you know, global communism, except add in, you know, AI and mass surveillance and drones and all the fun stuff that, you know, you don't want communists to have? Is that where we're heading, and is it inescapable?
Well, I am counting heavily on my intuition on this. I don't think I could. I don't think I could win a debate on this and say, well, because of this reason, let's give them all weightings. This one is 34%, and this is 22%. Add them up, we got 88%. I can't do it scientifically or mathematically, but I have this instinctive feeling that we're heading right straight for the very toilet that Yuri Bezmonov was describing, straight down the toilet. However, there's one thing there's different that has never existed before, and that is organized opposition. When you look at communist takeover of all these countries around the world, there was never any organized opposition except the governments themselves, which is one of the reasons they fell, is because the communists always perfected the art of infiltrating the governments. So they knew, not only the governments, but any institution that they knew would give them a pushback. They knew that they had to literally at least destabilize them or take them over before they could succeed. And so they always, in the early stages of communist revolution, before it ever became visible, they were busy putting their agents in positions in the government, into the media, into the police force, into the military, especially into the religious organizations, any institution that they thought might possibly be an effective opposition to them for the final takeover, they have put their people into those. Well, they did that here too, but I think what they didn't do is it didn't count on the fact this technological revolution that we're using right now, called the internet and Zoom and so forth. You and I, and possibly we're reaching, I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people right now. And the videos that you create and the videos I create and everybody else creates, and we circulate and we spread them around and so forth. Yeah, that's why they're trying to clamp down, because they've got to put a stop to that. But you know what? They're not stopping it. They're just forcing it into other side channels. Now, I think they're worried about that, and they're going to be working very hard to clamp down on all of the other side channels as soon as they can. But as long as they haven't, like we're living in this moment when the window is open right now, and I can't see anything of all the examples I've studied in the past where the communist revolution was successful, where there was ever that kind of a possibility for the people themselves to talk to each other and get organized and to learn from each other and to put up opposition. It's new. So it depends on what we do with it. If we just sit here and talk about it, well, then it's not going to make too much difference. But if we decide to get up off of our couches, take our masks off, walk out the door, meet each other, shake each other's hands, put our arms around each other, hug each other, and say, let's sit down, have a cup of coffee, and talk about what we're going to do about the city council meeting next Thursday. If we start doing things like that, then I think we're going to create a grassroots counter-revolution that is stronger than what they could possibly put into force. Now, does that mean it's going to be easy? No. Does that mean there'll be no bloodshed? Unfortunately, no. I think there's going to be some real serious violence on our hands. But if we all recognize that we're fighting for our liberty and our lives, well, so what else is new in history?
So I've kind of been going through a bit of a roller coaster with this, right? So initially, I would say I've always had sort of the lingering dread, right? And then COVID seemed to be, somebody punched the express ticket, and so many of these whatever forces or organizations saw it as like, oh man, here's our opportunity, and they really jumped in with both feet. And it's been in some ways terrifying how rapidly things have degraded, but in a bizarre, maybe this is just foolish optimism. I think that their hunger has betrayed them, and they've jumped in so aggressively, so quickly, that lots of folks who were previously asleep to it are now suddenly going, hey, you know, this does seem kind of suspect, right? Where if they had worked the Jacobin, you know, long con and hammered away slowly and with patience, they would have had perhaps less resistance. But I think they've betrayed themselves and potentially awoken their own enemy. Sort of the, I think this might be misattributed, but the whole supposed quote post Pearl Harbor of the Japanese general who, you know, we may have awoken a sleeping giant. So
Yeah.
what's your take on that? I mean, do you think people who were otherwise inactive are becoming activated, or am I just maybe trying to give myself a false sense of optimism?
No, I personally agree with that. I think it's that they are moving too rapidly. I often try to put myself into their position. I try to imagine myself, okay, I'm the big cheese now. I'm the guy. They're all sitting around the big oak table and looking at me to make the decision. What are we going to do, Chief? And I think, oh, I didn't say that. What are we going to do? So I try and put myself into their position and download their morality and their experiences and so forth. And I think that I came up with the answer. I would have said, we must not move too fast, because otherwise, we all know the story about the frog in the pot of water. You bring up the temperature slowly, it'll be boiled. And I think if I were the leader, I would say, we do not want to raise the temperature so fast that the frog will jump out. And then I would say, however, we must take that risk because look, they're waking up and we don't have a lot of time. And we have to move, we have to strike. And even though we're vulnerable now, we have to do it.
Yeah,
and
we
so
have to use the only tool we ever use, which is further oppression and violence, right?
So that's how I would have made the same decision that we see happening, but I think I would have done so with the knowledge that this was risky and they'd better not waver. We've got to go all the way or forget it.
How organic do you think organic or orchestrated COVID, Build Back Better, Great Reset have been?
How orchestrated? How far back it goes?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, was this laid out deliberately, or is this just stuff that's been waiting in the wings and a prime opportunity presented itself?
Oh, well, like so many of these questions, guys, you know, I hope everybody realizes that I have no idea.
Yeah,
this is purely speculation.
Yeah, just your opinion as somebody who's traveled these roads a lot longer than we have. So
we won't fact check you.
Yeah, that's the only advantage is I've been traveling the road of wonderment quite a while. So my opinion is that they operate very much like the military operates, in that they have rooms, if not buildings, full of people that prepare scenarios. They think, what if this? What would we do if that? Or if we did this, what would happen? And then what would we do? Military operations are always built around these scenarios and the playbooks. And what usually winds up, I'm told, is that they don't know which way they're going to go, but they've got several different ways to go. But they know if this happens, then they're going to change and do that. So in a way, it's all planned out, but we don't know which path it's going to travel, that's all. But all the paths have been channeled out. I think that's probably about how it works. They have to be flexible because no military operation is going to succeed if it doesn't have the option of, you know, changing course if something isn't working the way it was planned. But a good military operation would already have figured that into the equation. Yeah, if this doesn't work, then, you know, this is what we're going to do. And one of the things that should be a little sobering is the fact that when you look at some of these videos of these groups doing their simulations, you know, they always say, no, this will bring about a strong pushback from the public. Maybe you didn't pick up on that, but that agenda, what was it, that thing they did in just before the COVID?
Agenda 21, I believe.
Was it?
So you're referencing?
20, not 21. Agenda something. Anyway, that one. Yeah, all these guys were sitting around a square table, a line of tables, and they were all saying, well, there's going to be a lot of opposition, so we've got to squelch the news. We're going to call it fake news, and we've got to really pay attention to that. Well, you could see it right before your eyes. They were planning on what to do when the opposition hits. And so now you ask me, did they plan what's happening today? I don't think they planned exactly what's happening today very far in the past, but they planned what to do if it happened, you know, or maybe they planned to do this, but we couldn't be sure that that's the choice they were going to make. And maybe they didn't know till last month, you know?
Yeah.
So they have a lot of options. I guess I'm taking too long to say that, but all of those options are well thought out on their part.
Is that part of why, from an outside observer standpoint, there's such inconsistency in their, I guess the consistency is they're always doing what they believe will grant them power, but there's no principle to their positions. There's no consistency. Is it just cunning and opportunism that drives their actions every step of the way?
Well, I'm just wondering if I can agree with the fact that there's no consistency with it.
Well,
I
I'm
see it-
thinking,
I see-
so simple examples, right? Like, you know, when COVID first began, come on down to Chinatown, right? And then fast forward a couple of months and it's, oh, you know, we should have locked down sooner if we had only had, you know, better leadership. And it seems like their policy positions can turn on a dime and exist
see
in
what you
direct
mean, yeah.
contradiction to themselves.
Yes, at the sub category, yeah, a little minutia does change and is very contradictory. Now I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, but the main direction never changes. The big issues are always consistent. They
Mhm.
always lead in the same direction. Going back to what I said a moment ago, the name of the game is to scare the hell out of everybody, and whatever, and they never change on that. No matter what
Yeah.
happens, no matter what path you take, what door you open, there's a bigger monster behind that door than the previous one.
Yep.
So
Well, I believe you said earlier, and it's funny. I was talking with some friends recently, and we joked about it, but it was the same thing. You know, isn't it funny how the answer to everything is communism, right? You know, weather outside is too cold, global cooling. You're gonna need some communism to help you out. Oh, it's getting a little bit too hot. Well, you know what you can do to solve that? Communism.
mhm.
And it
Yeah,
just seems that that's the
yeah. Well, if you
the-
just swap out the word communism and use the word collectivism,
right,
you've really nailed it.
right.
Because the Nazis would do the same thing, and of course maybe it's the Democrats, maybe it's the Republicans, maybe it's not just the communists. We got a lot of Republicans out there that are really totally on board with this.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So the only thing that identifies all those people is what they believe, and they all believe in collectivism.
So now, what's your day to day like? You seem like you're very active, which is amazing. What projects are you doing? What you know, what does that look like, and what kind of things do you have, you know, going forward?
I am devoting almost all of my time to the development of a movement that can push back against this thing in an intelligent way, boots on the ground at the local level, not just on the internet and not just in Washington, D.C., but in every county. And because if we don't do that, that's the solution. We have to do that. We have to have boots on the ground. And the mechanism that we're using, hopefully to be the center of that, is Red Pill. That's the theme we're using. We have put on a series of Red Pill expos. We have an organization called Red Pill University. And so Red Pill University is in the process now of creating campuses in counties around the United States, little groups, not big groups. If our campus got to be over 60 people and probably over 40 people, we'd probably want to break it in half. And because we want small groups, we don't want big groups that come in every once in a while and expect to have a speaker come in and to talk to them. These are action groups. These are groups that'll mobilize community support for a local candidate, for the water board, the county board of supervisors, the sheriff's office, the board of education, and that kind of thing. So to answer your question, I'm putting all of my time now in the creation of Red Pill University and its offspring expos. Our next expo is already scheduled. We had one back in October for Jekyll Island, on Jekyll Island, actually. And it was a smashing success, by the way. It was our biggest and most successful event ever. And we were afraid nobody would come because after all, we were afraid, right? So who knows, we might be opposed, or they might not let us on an airplane, or, so we said, look, if you're afraid of that, stay home. We're not going to do us any good anyway. But if that scares you, just wait till later, So, so we played it that way, and that's the way we really felt it too. And they came, man, it was the biggest group, and it was wonderful. Our next event is scheduled now for June 4th, 5th, and 6th in Rapid City, South Dakota, which is a 30-mile drive from the monument at Mount Rushmore. We kind of like the symbolism there. Also, the state of South Dakota is one of the few sane states where they don't have everybody locked down as little slaves, and you can actually walk down the street and say hi to somebody without a mask, and go sit in a restaurant or go do whatever you want to do.
Aren't they the ones that threw a parade for their governor because she decided not to do the authoritarian lockdowns like so many others?
That's right. Yeah. Very smart governor. And so that's one of the reasons we're going to have it there. And but our real purpose in doing this is not only just to communicate information, but to get people together face to face. And some of them, of course, will do it online, just like we're doing. But then the idea is to establish little groups in each county and begin to have boots on the ground to accomplish real change, to take our information and turn it into political action, not partisan political action, but political action nevertheless. That's what I'm doing.
That's great. That's kind of the obsession of our page, is also trying to figure out how do we mobilize people and get people to stop being observers and, in the conversations. And one of our big pushes is trying to get people meeting in person and talking, or doing like Zoom, just long form conversation, just because we think that we have, liberal, classical liberal, complex ideas, and we want to get them off Twitter and get them off social media. We feel like a better home field advantage for that is these discussions, the place to really unpack ideas and not just say combative things, controlled by big tech in a manner that allows them to censor and determine who gets the microphone and who gets to speak. But
there comes a time you have to be up to speed on all those things, but there comes a time to do something about it. And that's why Red Pill University is so important to me. And so I'm sure you and your listeners will want to check it out. It sounds like it fits in perfectly with what you're doing. So,
we'll make sure we get links to that dropped into the post here on Facebook and get that information out.
Yeah. So I don't know if we said you had about an hour.
That's probably enough.
We certainly want to be sensitive to your time. I'm sure we could talk to you all night.
You guys know how it is. I always start I'm not going to take long with this, and 20 minutes maybe is nothing. And then an hour and a half later, we're still going. And oh man,
it's great to be able to talk to you. This is surreal. To talk to somebody that really, warned people and knew about kind of what we're facing today. And man, it feels like we're right on the cusp of it getting really bad. So I don't feel so good about even this weekend and going into inauguration. It seemed like Capitol Hill might just be a warm up for what's about to take place across the nation. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think we're about to enter, a really sort of violence and national emergency type?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't. It's because all of that is theater. It's not real. All the violence and all the hatred, all the things that are scaring people are committed by a small group of people that are on the payroll of Mr. Soros and the deep state. And they represent both sides of the conflict. And that's what we see on television. And of course, they can do a lot of havoc in one small place. But now when it comes to across the United States all at the same time, they don't have that. The American people are not that way. That does not represent the American people. It's a small group. I'm going to guess it's probably way under 10,000 people, probably about 3,000 or 4,000 people that they can mobilize and move around and blow things up and make it look really bad. And they're probably going to do that in the at the inauguration, but they're not going to do it in every city because they don't. I could be really embarrassed when this weekend comes along, but I don't think we're going to have large scale operations. But the point now really is this: it can appear that way. By the time the media gets through with it, looking
And
at your television,
that's what I mean is not so much. Yeah, am I worried about people coming into people's houses in the cities?
yeah,
But the justifications for absolute even a possible blackout on some social media to
mhm.
national emergency to lockdowns to shutting stuff down.
All of that
Do
stuff
we
could easily
do
be
we
done.
think
Yes.
that we're very close to something like that? Because it
Yeah.
feels like Capitol Hill is very much a setup for that. It's kind of a little warm up, and now they're kind of ramping up. Oh my God, we have people on Telegram talking about right wing plans to set off bombs or attack
Yeah.
here or blow stuff up. So it seems like we're on the verge of a massive sort of event. So
It feels
Yeah.
like a Patriot Act 2.0 is very, very
Yes.
soon on the horizon.
Yeah, and they'll do whatever is necessary to make it appear that that is happening. But I mean, all this business of right wing. I mean, do you know anybody that walks around in daily life with a swastika on their arm? These people are actors, and that people have to have that. You might find 6 or 7 people in the whole country that are just sick-minded enough to really believe that, but the rest of them, are actors, and they're there to throw public opinion with and revulsion against whatever side that they appear to be showing up. I remember way back in the day in the 1960s, there was an event we put on. We had just a small group of people, and blow me down if a couple of guys didn't show up to support us carrying the Nazi flag. Who were these guys? We didn't know. Who were these guys? And we never saw them again, but they went there because it was a photo op. So,
Right.
that's how it works. It's theater. And
Yep.
that convinced everybody who saw the pictures in the newspaper that we were a bunch of Nazis. So
Yep.
this is how it works. And so, but they can get away with it because they control the media. The media will play it and play it and play it until finally you think, oh my God, these Nazis are everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, they clearly there were. It's not the story that's being told. I think the story was that Trump riled people up, and then people entered the Capitol, and you had you had people that were prepared in riot gear, had water, had umbrellas, had things that you don't see from Trump rallies and Trump protests.
Yeah, and those were not Trump supporters.
Right. And there's enough evidence. We even had several people that have been arrested that were, part of left-wing radical groups.
Yeah.
One that was actually in cahoots with CNN here recently. So yeah, the point is that they got away with it and it was controlled. Why wouldn't they do it on a massive scale and then give them, because they, like you said, they fear a massive organized resistance and they fear the truth getting out.
Mhm.
And so they need to close the door as they enter. And it just feels like this is that door closing event that justifies, all right, no more Telegram. We're going to strictly monitor Zoom. Time to purge everything on Facebook, close down.
This I think we can look forward to.
It feels like it's very, very near.
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, because they will. That's why they're doing this, is to have that pretense, that the so-called justification of doing these things. And unfortunately, a lot of good people, patriots and Trump supporters, I mean, genuine Trump supporters, are going to fall for it. They're going to say, yeah, we need martial law to put an end to this. And they're the first ones to be calling for martial law.
Yeah.
What a deception that is. I mean, boy. And I was always afraid that Mr. Trump himself would call martial law, and everybody would say, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Trump, for doing that." And I thought that was, what the game they were going to play.
I will say, for all of his fumblings, his refusal to give in to the obvious ploy of baiting him for martial law, I was pretty impressed with.
Yep.
Well, it's an absolute honor to speak to you before the world ends. And
well, so on an optimistic note, maybe just anecdotally, so I can say with high confidence, so your work, Creature from Jekyll Island, was probably one of the first jumping off points that really started me down the journey of kind of, unraveling the ball of thread and seeing where all the tendrils went, right? Learning about how the financial system actually works, learning about the Federal Reserve, learning about how, tentacles spread outward from there into other institutions. So, tremendous honor to have the chance to speak with you. And very gracious for the time you've given to us today.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. It's I always enjoy these conversations, and it gives me a special thrill knowing that there might be a whole bunch of people listening in, and maybe we can say some things that will give them both a little encouragement and a little courage too, because the two have to go together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll definitely send people your way. I think one of the things that we're realizing is that there are just a lot of little micro groups, and if we can just find a way to piece them together, then we might be able to form a bigger set of resistance than we might realize.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, let's work together on that. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very
Thank you so much.
sir.
All right, take it easy now. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a nice night.